So today I wanted to focus on a parsha in the parsha, a story, a paragraph, which happens right after Shirat Hayam. Usually people talk about Shirat Hayam, I know, but I want to talk about what happened after Shirat
Hmm.
Hayam. And in general, I think that it's a parsha of highs and lows. Like
Hmm.
you
For
have
sure.
Kiryat Yam Suf, and then you have Milchemet Amalek. You have,
Hmm.
and they're free, but the waters are
Yep.
bitter. They cannot drink. They need a miracle. They complain. A lot of highs and lows we have in this parsha. However, David, we thought we have a chavrusa, me and Dave.
You're
Yeah,
ruining it, Maui. You're ruining it.
I just found the link. I couldn't find the link.
The link is always there.
It's
I
the
could
same
leave if
link.
you want. I don't have to be here. It's okay. I don't want to start trouble with you guys.
Fine, we'll allow it this one time.
Okay, I'll try and be quiet during this year. Okay.
Hmm.
No, chas v'shalom. Don't be quiet, David.
Don't worry, Rob. I don't know if he knows how. It's okay.
I have him twice a week. It's not the first time. I have David, Baruch Hashem, twice a week.
Yeah.
He comes to the Gemara Shiur also, and Leah, she's coming also every Shiur.
Nice and
Ah,
chill.
I think Leia enjoys it more than I do.
I told you, you must bring Leah to the Shiurim. I told you already.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right after Shirat Hayam, we have the story of Mara. The Torah says the following: Vayasam Moshe et Israel miyam suf. Moshe caused Israel to set out from the sea of reeds miyam suf. They went on into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Very depressing, very annoying. Okay, after such a high in spirituality, Shirat Hayam, miracles, 3 days they're wandering around, there's no water. ויבואו מרתה. They came to Mara, ולא יכלו לשתות מים ממרה, but they could not drink the water of Mara. Here we have a phenomenon that we have a lot in the Bible, in the Tanakh in general. The name of the place that the Torah represents, it's the name of the place after what happened in the place. So we call it Mara because of what we don't know yet happened, but now we're going to know what happened. They couldn't drink because the water, it was bitter. Al ken kara shma Mara. This is why it was named Mara. Va'ilonu העם על משה לאמור, מה נשתה? So the people grumbled against Moshe, saying, "What shall we drink?" And this is the pasuk I want to focus on, the last one. Vayitzak el Hashem. So he cried to Hashem, Vayoreu Hashem etz. And Hashem showed him a piece of wood. Vayashlech el hamayim. He threw it into the water. Vayimteku hamayim. And the water became sweet. Sham sam lo choku mishpat. Those are the words that I want to focus on. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. So what's the meaning of Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat Vesham Nisahu? That's my question for today. I did it big for you, David. Okay? So the Torah says, Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat Vesham Nisahu. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. What's the meaning of that? So Rashi says, Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat. Here he made for them a statute and an ordinance. At Mara, he gave them a few sections of the Torah in order that they might engage in the study thereof. The sections containing the command regarding the Shabbat, the red heifer, para aduma, and the administration of justice, dinim. Okay, so Shabbat, para aduma, vedinim. 3 mitzvot. So according to Rashi, which is weird because right after the story of Mara, what's the connection to those mitzvot? Especially when the Torah says right away after, Vesham Nisahu. And there he tried them. And Rashi explains that, and then he tried them, goes back to what happened in Mara. Okay? And there he tried them, even though it says him, singular, means to the people, and he saw their stubbornness, that they did not consult with Moshe in a respectful fashion, in a respectful way, and read mercy for us that we may have water to drink, but they murmured. So, according to Rashi, the words Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat, the Torah refers to 3 special mitzvot that they received. But right away, the Torah says, Vesham Nisahu, and the Torah goes back to what happened before. So, it's a little bit weird to say that Sham Sam, what's the connection between the 2 parts of this phrase? Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat, Vesham Nisahu. Okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them 3 mitzvot, Kibud Shabbat, Para Aduma, Dinim, according to Rashi, and Sham Nisau goes back to what happened before. Rashi doesn't explain the connection between those mitzvot and what happened. The connection between those mitzvot and the story, the incident that the Torah talks about, especially if the Torah mixed them together, Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat, Vesham Nisahu. And right away, again, Sham Nisahu, according to Rashi, it's a little bit hard. Ramban has a difficulty with Rashi's explanation. And Ramban says, again, before we see the Gemara, Ramban says, he quotes Rashi. I don't have it in English, I'm sorry, but after he quotes Rashi, he says, V'ani tamea. And I have a question. Lama lo peresh kan hachukim haele ve'hamishpatim? If according to Rashi, and we will see the source of Rashi, it's a Gemara. If according to Rashi and the sages, the words Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat refers to 3 mitzvot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us b'mara, in this place, why the Torah doesn't represent it as the Torah represents usually commandments that we receive? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, tzav et bnei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem, you should do this and that. Why we don't have a paragraph that the Torah represents those mitzvot? Why Sham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat? In a very mysterious way, the Torah says that we received 3 laws. Why like that? Says Ramban. The way that the Torah usually represents when we receive a mitzvah from Moshe is Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, tzav et bnei Yisrael, as we had previously in Parshas Bo regarding Kiddush HaChodesh, Korban Pesach, all those mitzvot. So why now we have 3 hidden mitzvot that we received but without direct representation in the psukim? That's the question that Ramban is asking. And I will add to the question of Ramban. Those mitzvot will be, Kadosh Baruch Hu will repeat those mitzvot Behar Sinai, and then later on Be'arvot Moav, before we enter the land of Israel. Those are the 3. Okay?
But these 3 hooks, they're not in this week's Parsha. We're just saying that.
I agree. That's the question of Ramban. This is exactly the question. Ramban says, I don't get it. Why to say, Ken, why are we saying, it's a little bit too big for me. Why are we saying that we have 3 commandments here that HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually gave the nation of Israel, Ken, but the Torah doesn't say them? So what's the idea? The Torah will teach us those mitzvot later on. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will repeat. It's not only that the Torah doesn't say, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor tzav et bnei Yisrael. The Torah does not represent those mitzvot as the Torah should have represented. Not only that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will repeat those mitzvot Behar Sinai, and will repeat those mitzvot at the moment before we enter the land of Israel, Be'arvot Moav. Those are the 3 places we received commandments according to Chazal. B'mara, those 3, or maybe others, Be'ar Sinai, Ve'be'arvot Moav. So Ramban is asking why the Torah doesn't represent those mitzvot if we actually received them here. And I am asking why we received them here if we will receive them again in Har Sinai. What's the symbol, or what's the importance of those specific mitzvot? And maybe I'm implying that there is a connection between those mitzvot and what happened. Those mitzvot and the story of Mara. Those mitzvot and the situation, the status of the nation of Israel. What's the connection? This is actually what I'm asking. But before, let's see how Rashi changed from what the sages are saying. In the Gemara, the sages are saying that Bnei Israel received 10 commandments b'mara, 7 already, Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, okay? 7 out of the 10 was Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the descendants of Noach accepted upon themselves, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu added 3. The following: judgment, as we said, to establish a system of judgment, and Shabbat, and honoring one's father and mother. Kibud Avayim. So according to Chazal, and Chazal are proving it from the words Sham Sam Lo Chok Umishpat, we can say that Chok, what's Chok? It's law, okay, to establish courts, to establish a system of law. Mishpat, it's the what's mishpat? Let's ask previously. What's chok and what's the difference between chok and mishpat? So in Hebrew, it's not the same thing, right? Chok, it's law. Mishpat, it's judgment. So I messed up a little bit. So chok should be Dave.
And it's super rational.
What's super rational?
Chok, no?
Something that is beyond
right, like kosher.
Okay. Is there one of those 3 mitzvot in the Gemara is a chok, according to your definition? To establish a system of judgment, Shabbat, Kibud Avayim, one of those laws, it's a mitzvah that it's a chok, that it's beyond understanding?
Well, Shabbat could be a chok.
Why? Shabbat has an explanation.
It's an explanation, but it's not something you could naturally necessarily come up with. Respecting your parents, you could come up with that naturally.
But when I will explain it to you, you will understand. Nachon?
Mm.
So there is a difference between chok, something that we cannot explain, cannot understand, and mitzvah Shabbat. So Dave, you touched a point here that according to the Gemara, there is no, out of those 3, there is nothing that it's by definition what we call chok, a mitzvah without an explanation. In those 3, none of those mitzvot is a mitzvah without an explanation.
Correct.
We can
Can I add one thing too? Sorry, because you say 7. It says the Sheva mitzvot b'Noach, but one of the 7 is judgment. One of the 7 is to establish tribunals and make judgments. So why is the Gemara saying the 7 plus of another judgment? It's a different judgment.
So actually, this is a machloket. If judgment is part of Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, and the Gemara and the Rishonim are dealing with your question, and maybe your question is an answer why Rashi changed from the Gemara's explanation, even though Rashi brings dinim. Rashi does bring dinim. Rashi changes something else. But first, the Gemara says judgment, Shabbat, v'kibud avayim. Why? How can we learn it from the psukim? We have different ways in the Rishonim. First of all, when Hashem commands us mitzvah Shabbat, Hashem says, Ka'asher tzivecha Hashem Elokecha. When the Torah refers to Shabbos, the Torah says, as I commanded you in the past. So Shabbat is part of the mitzvot that we received before Har Sinai. Dinim v'kibud avayim, chok u'mishpat, we have differences between the Rishonim, which one is a chok, which one is a mishpat. But I want to go back to Rashi, who took out kibud avayim, and Rashi, he put
the chok by excellence.
Para aduma.
The chok.
יפה מאוד. אז רש"י כתב שבת, דינים ופרה אדומה. פרה אדומה זאת חוקת התורה. Para Aduma, it's the example, the proper example, the prototype of a chukah, something we have no way to understand, no way of understanding. So maybe this is the reason why Rashi took out. There is another version in the Midrash, different versions, but Rashi didn't take the version in the Gemara. Rashi picked a different version than the Gemara. And Rashi changed, he took out from the Gemara this version that has Kibud Avaim, and instead Rashi put in the example of Para Aduma. I just want to say that if we go back to last week's Parsha, we have a pasuk, Ma ha'edot ve'achukim ve'amishpatim asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu etchem. Edot, chukim, u'mishpatim are three different definitions of mitzvot. Chukim, as we said before, it's mitzvot that we cannot understand, and we will eventually, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reveal again in the future the ta'am, the reason for those mitzvot, but we cannot understand. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, even Shlomo, there is a discussion in the Midrash if one of them received from HaKadosh Baruch Hu an explanation. But for us, for sure, it's beyond understanding. That's chukim. Mishpatim, when we say mishpatim, it's mitzvot sichliot. Those are the commandments that we can come up with even without HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanding us to do. We can understand it on ourselves, on our own. That the fact that we need to establish a system of law, court, and right judgment in society, it's not an invention of the Torah. It existed before. This is something that people can understand on their own. That's mishpat. So the example of chok, it's para aduma. The example of mishpat is dinim, to establish system of law. What's the example for edut? Edut comes from the word edut, testimony. And edut is a mitzvah that symbolizes something, that witnessed regarding something. As I said before, and when we receive those kind of mitzvot, Hashem will explain to us what's the reason of this mitzvah. It will be an edut, which, for example, the laws of Pesach. The laws of Pesach are mitzvot that we received in order to remember, to testify about something that happened to us as a nation so many years ago. So the edut, Shabbat, it's also edut, because Shabbat, it's a testimony that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one that created the 6 weekdays in Shabbat, Chidush Maaseh Bereshit, the cycle of Maaseh Bereshit. This is what we actually testify when we keep Shabbat. We testify and we believe and we declare this faith of Zecher LeMaaseh Bereshit. So it's edut. Edut. So we have 3 different categories of mitzvot. Edot, chukim, u'mishpatim. Rashi goes very well with those 3 categories. Rashi says, chukim, para aduma, mishpatim, dinim, edot, Shabbat. In the Gemara, we didn't find a mitzvah that it's a chok. But let's go back to the questions we asked before. Why it's important to give those 3 mitzvot, those 3 categories? Why now? What's the connection to the test? Vesham nisau, and there he tried them. What's the trial? What's the nisayon here? So first of all, what's a nisayon in general? When the Torah says that Hashem is trying the nation of Israel, what's the nisayon? Ramban, there's a very important Ramban. Ramban talks about Akedat Yitzchak when the Torah says, "Ve'Elohim nisa et Avraham," and God tested Avraham. I think that this Ramban is a very basic Ramban in Jewish notions. We use this Ramban even without knowing that it comes from Ramban. But Ramban says that test in general shows that a person has the absolute authority to perform an action. One can, meaning, in other words, a test is a proof of the free will that a person has. One can do what they want and not do what one doesn't want. It is called a nisayon, a test, for the individual being tested, in this case that Ramban talks about, Akedat Yitzchak, it's Avraham Avinu, but the blessed tester will command him to bring out the thing from ability to actuality, giving a reward for a good action and not just a reward for a good heart. Know that Hashem trieth the righteous when he knows that a righteous person will act according to his will, but still seeks that person to act with their righteousness. He will command him to a test, but he does not test the wicked, since they would anyways not hear. And behold, every test in the Torah is for the good of the one being tested. So Ramban gives us two main principles regarding what's a trial, what's a test when Hashem tested someone. First, he says a test is a proof of the free will. Second, Hashem is testing only someone that can pass the test. Therefore, Hashem will try the righteous people, not the wicked people. And the purpose of the test is that the person, maybe that's the third principle, that the person will find within himself powers or strength that without the test he could not have found. And this test will elevate him. Therefore, the word nisayon in Hebrew comes from the same root as nes, which is not a miracle. Nes in Hebrew, it's also something that you can see that it's high. Okay? Lehitnoses, it's to put something in a high spot, in a high place. So nisayon, it's not only a test, it's also a way to elevate the person that is being tested. Those are the three principles that Ramban says regarding a nisayon. Now, when the Torah uses here the term vesham nisahu, that means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the nation of Israel a test, and this test is a test that they can go through the test, and they are righteous enough to either to succeed in the test. They can fail, but they can succeed. And the purpose is to elevate them. Now, according to Rashi, Vesham Nisau goes back to the story of Mara. But maybe we can offer that Vesham Nisau goes not with what happened before. Vesham Nisau goes with Vesham Sam Lo Choku Mishpat, with the commandments that Hashem gave the nation of Israel. That was the test, not the water, not the story with Mara. Story with Mara, it's one thing. And the mitzvot that Hashem gave us after the story of Mara, it's a different thing. And this is the Nisayon. It's even more simple when you see the structure of the pasuk. Sham sam lo choku mishpat, vesham nisahu. Doesn't have to go all the way back that for the story that was before. And if we read the pasuk like this, then when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us those three mitzvot, that was the Nisayon. Now, let's go back to the question of Ramban. What's the Nisayon? Ramban says, if it's a mitzvah, why the Torah doesn't represent the mitzvah? Because in this case, the mitzvah, the specific mitzvah, it's not the point. The point is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the nation of Israel three mitzvot, each mitzvah from one category of the 613 mitzvot that they will receive later on. But now HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them a trial, a test. I'm going to give you three mitzvot. Each mitzvah is a mitzvah that belongs to a different category of the mitzvot that we will receive later on. Now HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them those mitzvot in order to see what's going to be the reaction, how they are going to react when they receive three different categories of mitzvot. So when they receive the mitzvah of dinim, to establish a system of law that's, I don't know if it's difficult. Doesn't seem to be something difficult. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, in the Torah that you will receive, there is a whole category that will deal with mitzvot that you can get on your own, but the Torah will either improve them, either give details, either emphasize that we need to establish. Some mitzvot will be mitzvot that will keep society, that will keep good relations between people. It's a declaration. Then we have mitzvah Shabbat. We have edot. So they received Korban Pesach and a lot of mitzvot that are related to Korban Pesach. But now, Kadosh Baruch Hu is giving a mitzvah Shabbat. It's the mitzvah that it belongs more to faith. Ha'emunah bechidush ma'aseh bereshit. Ze mitzvah Shabbat. And then, Para Aduma, that's the most difficult mitzvah. Chukah. Kadosh Baruch Hu is giving those mitzvot now in order to show the people those three special categories. This is the Nisayon, and the Nisayon elevates. The Nisayon is here to elevate them. Okay, but yet what's the connection to the story before? To the story of Mara. So here, it's maybe a midrashic view, but I want to say it anyhow. There is an argument in the Midrash, Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, what was the tree? So one opinion of Rabbi Yoshua was Etz Shel Arava. The other opinion is, Rabbi Elazar Amudai Omer, Ze Etz Shel Zayit, She'en Lecha Etz Mar Yoter Mi-Etz HaZayit. We can pay attention to the fact, and it's another Midrash, that Kadosh Baruch Hu told him to use something bitter in order to make the bitter water sweet. It may be an idea that came back later on with the homeopathy, you say in English, that you can treat an illness with the same, and so we can cure bitterness with bitterness. That's a very interesting idea. However, according to Rabbi Lazar Amodeh, it was a zayit. Zayit, it's also bitter. So the bitterness of the zayit made the bitterness of the water sweet.
It's like a vaccine.
Exactly. Nachon. This is a principle in medicine. Nachon. Rabbi Shimon, but then Rabbi Shua ben Korcha says Ze'etz Hardufni, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, after all those opinions, which kind of a tree it was, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says, Davar min ha-Torah her'au. Kadosh Baruch Hu showed him one of the laws of the Torah. Davar min ha-Torah. It's very weird. After all those opinions that talks about which tree it was, what was the kind of the tree, which type, Rabbi Shimon comes and says it was spiritual. It was not something physical. It was spiritual. Davar min ha-Torah er'au. What's the idea behind it? How, first of all, how he proves it from the psukim. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, we know the character of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Nachon, a very spiritual character. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, the word Vayorehu Hashem etz comes from the root Hora'ah, which is an instruction, a teaching even. Ken more, a teacher, comes from the word Hora'ah, lehorot. Vayorehu, it's not to show. Vayorehu, it's either to teach, according to Rabbi Shimon, to instruct, to teach. It's not a normal word, says Rabbi Shimon. He's very sensitive to the words in the Torah. So Rabbi Shimon says the Torah should have used the term Vayar'ehu Hashem etz. Hashem showed him, Leshon Re'iyah, Vayar'ehu. But the Torah doesn't say Vayar'ehu. The Torah says Vayorehu, which is a word that we use for teaching. So according to Rabbi Shimon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught Moshe Rabbeinu something, and when he taught him something, he cured the water. I want to take the idea of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and I want to explain the pasuk now a little bit different than Rashi. After the story of Mara, and after the Shira and after Kriyat Yamsuf, they arrived to the wilderness and they were traveling for 3 days without water. And when they find water, sof finally, it's bitter. Hashem says, Hashem is not angry. From now on, we need to examine why in certain stories Hashem is angry for the reaction of the people and why sometimes he is not. In this case, he's not. Kadosh Baruch Hu is not saying anything bad regarding the reaction of the nation of Israel in this case. Nachon? He just says to Moshe, take the stick, this piece of wood, throw it to the water. We can be doirish that etz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. Kadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to explain to the nation of Israel that life, the water, sometimes, or maybe all the time, it's bitter, it's hard, it's difficult. The way to make things sweet is by etz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. The way to sweeten the bitterness is, כמו שאומר רבי שמעון בן יוחאי, דבר מן התורה הראהו. Kadosh Baruch Hu taught him something to teach the nation of Israel. What's the teaching? Those 3 mitzvot. Sham, Sam, Lo, Chok, Mishpat. Those 3 categories. Chok, Mishpat, Edut, Para Aduma, Dinim, Shabbat. Those 3 categories that Hashem gave them now was in order to make them, to prepare them, to elevate them, and to engrave in their hearts and minds that the way that a Jew survives in the world, in the bitterness of this world, is with etz chaim hi lamachazikim ba. It's with davar min haTorah. Vayoreu Hashem etz. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's difficult. That's the way to sweeten the difficulty. That's the way to sweeten the bitterness. Now, if we read the pasuk like this, then the story of Mara was just a symbol. The story of Mara was just a parable. The story of Mara was just kind of heads up for for the message that Hashem wanted to give them right away. Sham Sam Lo Chok Mishpat. Hashem gave them mitzvot, Torah u mitzvot, and Hashem tried them and tested them by saying, look, without etz, without Torah, without mitzvot, everything is bitter. There's no taste. There's no way you can survive the bitterness and the difficulty of the world without Torah u mitzvot. And Torah u mitzvot, it's with all those 3 different categories and ways that we have in the Torah. Mitzvot, chukim, umishpatim, edot, the things we understand, the things we don't understand. All those things are the ways in which we can sweeten the bitterness, and things are not any more difficult when you are connected to etz chaim hi lamachazikim ba, to the tree of knowledge, to the tree of Torah. This is what I think we can, if we are connecting all the pieces.
But you can connect it to the beginning of that also, where it says Mayim is the Torah. Like they went 3 days without Mayim, and people also adoresh that Mayim is Bli Torah. So that's how we institute to have Torah every 3rd day, because it's you can't go 3 days with Torah. So you start with Mayim. Mayim is the Torah. So but finally when they find Mayim, it's a bitter Mayim. So how do you to say that the Torah is bitter unless you have to sweeten it also? So I guess you can misinterpret Torah. I don't know. I'm trying to make the connection between the two. I like what you said. I'm just trying to see how it could fit in with both Torah is Mayim and it's now the Etz also. So it's like It's a continuum. And I have another question, just as you think about this. We say there's 3 mitzvot that they gave, but the pasuk only says 2 things: chok umishpat in singular. So why everybody adds a third, like edut, like you mentioned edut, but it doesn't say sham samlo chok umishpat. Chok, I can understand it's paraduma. Chok, everybody's agreeing should be paraduma. Mishpat is mishpatim. And where's the edut there? Like, I know Shabbat was given. I know the Rashi, I know others. Shabbat is given in the Parasha because we see with the Parasha Taman, that's where Shabbat has been commanded. So it's funny how everybody, like the Gemara, Rashi himself, and Rashi in another place, also in the Torah, changes because there's a Rashi that I think in Devarim that says that at Mara he gave he talks about Kibud Avayim, so it's like Rashi gives both opinions in 2 different places. He changes. So there's always 3 mitzvot, but the pasuk only says 2 things: Sham, Sam, Lo, Chok Mishpat. Why do we have 3? Why we add the 3rd one?
So I mentioned before that Chazal are learning it from another pasuk, not from the Chok Mishpat here, from the pasuk Ka'asher Tzivvecha Hashem Elokecha. When the Torah refers to mitzvah Shabbat, the Torah says, Ka'asher tzivvecha Hashem Elokecha. What's Ka'asher tzivvecha Hashem Elokecha? Meaning,
so it could be man, it could be the man. It doesn't have to be Mara, it's a man.
But where? With Chok u'Mishpat, also Shabbat. So it's not written here. We learned it from another pasuk. But when Hashem gave us mitzvot, b'Mara, right? So Ka'asher tzivvecha. That's the way they explain it. I get your question is a very good question. And the question before goes very well with what I said, because as you said, the Gemara in Baba Kama, the Gemara says, "Vayilchu sheloshet yamim bamidbar velo matzu mayim, en mayim ela Torah." So they were without Torah, without guidance, without. So what happens? Magiim lemara velo yachlu lishtot mayim mimara ki marim hem. So according to Chassidut explains that Torah is not an insurance. People can learn Torah, but without a certain state of mind, of Kabbalat Ol, of understanding that we are learning Torah Hashem. Torah can be a chokhmah, Torah can be a wisdom, Torah can be something that you learn and you understand, but it's not something that has influence on your life, on your daily basis actions. Torah can be a very nice thing to learn, to think about, but not necessarily something that influences life. So, Mayim Mimara, there is a few Torot Chasidiyot about it, that Lo Yachlu Lishtot Mayim Mimara Ki Marim Hem, the Torah without Kabbalat Ol Mitzvot can be a bitter Torah. Like the Torah says, like the Gemara says, that the Torah can be Zacha Na'aset Lo Sam Chaim, Lo Zacha Na'aset Lo Sam Mavet. The Gemara says in Masechet Ta'anit that the Torah is, the Torah depends on the receptacle. In another way, the Torah is like rain that falls over a field. The grass says it, that it depends on what you have on your field, the Torah will grow. If you have midot metukanot, if you have kabbalat ol, then your field is a good field, a field that you took care of, then the Torah shezemayim will grow beautiful fruits. But if you have a field full of kotzim, kotzim, harulim, vechule, then it's gonna grow whatever there is in the ground. This is what's gonna grow. And Gemara says it very, very specifically regarding Torah. Zacha na'aset lo sam chaim, lo zacha na'aset lo sam hamavet. The Gemara is very extreme about it. So, what do we do in order to make the bitter water sweet? Meaning, the connection to the Torah, a good and a healthy connection. Kabbalat ol mitzvot. We need to receive upon ourselves those 3 categories of mitzvot. The category of chukim, which the main thing is to nullify my will towards the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kabbalat ol mamash, that's chok. Mishpat, it's to understand that the Torah takes care of the order of society. There is no way that learning Torah will be a contradiction to the order of society. That's mishpat. Edut is, as we said, faith. There is no way that someone learns Torah and has a lack in his faith. Kol ha-mitzvot shehem edut are about to be able to testify that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the creator, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who took us out of Egypt. Edut is mamash, to testify that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is almighty and he did everything. It's about faith. So faith, and there is a difference between chok ve'edut. Chok, it's mamash, to nullify yourself towards the heavenly will, Ritzon Hashem. Edut, it's not to nullify myself, it's to establish, to engrave faith. Without those three, the Torah is bitter. Maim, marim. We need to sweeten them. That's the way to sweeten them, with those three categories of mitzvot. Vesham nisahu, that's the way to elevate the nation of Israel as a preparation for Matan Torah. This is the Hasidic view. If I'm connecting what you said, Maim ze Torah, Maim marim, then those three categories of mitzvot are mamash, the way to take care that the Torah won't be bitter, that the Torah will be sweet.
And that you need all three of them.
You need all three of them. Nachon? Al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omed. You need chok, kabbalat ol, לעבוד את השם כמו עבד, like a slave. לעשות את רצון השם because that's רצון השם. Without understanding. This is actually something that needs to influence all the mitzvot. Even though if I understand, even though I can explain, this is not the reason why I do it. I do it because Hashem told me to do it. And the chok should influence all the mitzvot. And the edut should influence all the mitzvot also, because the edut is the faith. I do everything with faith. Mishpat, the order of society. Also, it's something that we do not because we understand that it's important. It's important and we understand, but we do it because the Torah says. We do it because HaKadosh Baruch Hu say that we should do. I hope it was clear.